As a master clockmaker, I know Victorian pocket watches don't emit 2.4 gigahertz signals. That's how I caught my boss using $15,000 antiques to spy on our wealthy clients. The brass gears caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows of heritage timepieces, casting tiny golden shadows across my mahogany workbench. 40 years of this work, and I still felt that familiar satisfaction settling into my bones as I arranged my tools with surgical precision. Every spring-loaded caliper, every jeweler's loop, every delicate screwdriver had its place, just like the gears in the timepieces I restored. Eleanor Pemberton's 1880s Waltham pocket watch sat before me like a patient waiting for surgery. The case gleamed with the deep patina that only comes from decades of careful handling. I photographed it from 3 angles before touching it. Documentation first, always. That's what separated craftsmen from tinkerers. "Beautiful piece," I murmured, adjusting my magnifying lens. The workshop hummed quietly around me. 17 antique clocks ticking in gentle harmony. Vivaldi's Four Seasons playing softly from the corner radio. The familiar scent of brass polish and machine oil. This was my sanctuary, where time itself bent to my will. I lifted the pocket watch, feeling its weight in my palm. The heft was substantial, proper American railroad grade. The chain showed honest wear patterns, the kind that develop when a man carries the same timepiece for decades. Everything felt perfectly normal in my ordered world. The case opened with that satisfying click I'd heard thousands of times before. Inside, the intricate brass movement revealed itself like a mechanical flower blooming. My practiced eye immediately cataloged the components. Jeweled bearings catching the light, blued steel hands positioned at 1047, the characteristic Waltham escapement with its distinctive anchor shape. 1887 manufacture, I noted in my restoration log, cross-referencing the serial number with my leather-bound reference books. The mechanism showed the expected age patina, that subtle darkening of brass that comes from a century of exposure to air and oils. But something made me pause. I lifted the movement again, testing its weight distribution in my palm. Something whispered in my subconscious, that sixth sense honed by 4 decades of handling antique timepieces. The balance felt off. Not dramatically, just a fraction that shouldn't exist in a properly maintained Waltham. I set the movement down and reached for my precision scale. The reading showed 127.3 grams, within normal parameters for this model. But my hands knew what my instruments couldn't measure. There was something different about this piece. The workshop door chimed, and Susan Allen's designer heels clicked against the hardwood floor. I looked up from my workbench to see her perfectly styled figure approaching. Platinum blonde hair pulled into that severe chignon she always wore. Navy suit tailored to corporate perfection. "How's the Pemberton restoration coming along?" she asked, her voice carrying that practiced warmth she used with wealthy clients. Her cold blue eyes swept over my workspace, taking in the disassembled components. "Making progress," I replied carefully, not mentioning my concerns about the weight distribution. Something in her expectant expression made me hesitate. Susan had owned heritage timepieces for 3 years now, but she still looked at my work like she was trying to decode a foreign language. "Eleanor Pemberton is one of our most valuable clients," she said, her tone carrying subtle pressure. "She specifically requested our finest craftsmen." Her manicured nails tapped against my workbench. "I trust you'll give this your usual meticulous attention." I nodded, sensing the underlying message about maintaining our prestigious reputation. The scent of her expensive perfume, something French and sharp, mingled with the workshop's familiar aromas of brass and oil. "I'll treat it with the care it deserves," I assured her. She lingered for another moment, her gaze fixed on the open pocket watch. "Good. Mrs. Pemberton has some very important business meetings coming up. She's quite attached to that timepiece." Something in her voice made the hair on my neck stand up, but I couldn't pinpoint why. After she left, the workshop felt different somehow. Less like my sanctuary, more like I was being watched. I shook off the feeling and returned to the Waltham, determined to solve the mystery of its odd weight distribution. I began the delicate process of removing the movement from its case, my steady hands working with the precision that had built my reputation. Each component had to be cataloged, photographed, and carefully stored in my felt-lined trays. The mainspring barrel would come out first, the heart of any mechanical timepiece. As I worked the barrel free from its mounting, something caught my eye. Under my high-powered magnifier, microscopic tool marks appeared around the barrel's edge. But these weren't the rough, hand-filed marks typical of 1880s manufacturing. These were clean, precise cuts that could only come from modern machining tools. "That's odd," I muttered, adjusting the magnification higher. The scratches were definitely recent, possibly within the last few years. My pulse quickened as the implications hit me. Someone had opened this movement, and they'd done it with equipment that didn't exist when this watch was made. I photographed the evidence with my macro lens, the camera's flash illuminating every suspicious mark. My methodical mind began cataloging possibilities, and none of them were good. Who would tamper with a priceless antique? And more importantly, why? The brass gears seemed to stare back at me accusingly, as if they were trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I forced myself to breathe steadily as I lifted the mainspring barrel from its housing. My fingers, hands that had assembled thousands of these mechanisms, immediately registered something wrong. The weight was off. Not dramatically, but enough to make my stomach clench. "What the hell?" I whispered, turning the brass component in the afternoon light streaming through the workshop windows. The barrel looked authentic. The patina was right. The engravings matched the period. Even the microscopic wear patterns seemed genuine. But it felt heavy. Too heavy, like someone had packed it with lead shot. I set it down on my felt pad, my hands trembling slightly. 40 years of restoration work, and I'd never encountered anything like this. The familiar workshop suddenly felt foreign around me. The comforting tick of wall clocks now seemed ominous, like they were counting down to something terrible. My digital calipers sat in their velvet-lined case waiting. I reached for them with the same reverence I'd use to handle a loaded gun. The cold metal felt solid in my palm as I positioned the jaws around the barrel's circumference. The readout made my blood pressure spike. 14.8 millimeters. Standard specification for this model was 14.5. Someone had added 0.3 millimeters to the thickness. Skillfully, professionally, but unmistakably. "Son of a bitch," I breathed, setting the calipers aside. The implications crashed over me like a wave. Someone had opened this watch. Someone had modified it. And they'd done it with surgical precision, maintaining the antique's appearance while hiding... what? Drugs? Diamonds? Something worse? I glanced toward Susan's office through the workshop's glass partition. She was on the phone, gesturing animatedly at her computer screen. Did she know? Was this why she'd been so insistent about meticulous attention? The trust I'd built in this workplace over 4 years began crumbling like old clockwork springs. Every interaction with Susan replayed in my mind with new, darker undertones. Her emphasis on Eleanor Pemberton's important business meetings. Her lingering stare at the open timepiece. The way she'd watch me work like she was evaluating my potential to discover something. My chest tightened as paranoia crept in. How many other pieces had come through this workshop? How many had I restored without knowing they contained hidden compartments? The Victorian pocket watch lay open before me like a patient on an operating table, its secrets partially exposed but still guarded. I needed to know what was inside that barrel, but opening it might destroy whatever evidence existed. And if Susan was involved, confronting her without proof could be career suicide. I reached for my digital signal analyzer, a device I normally use for diagnosing quartz movements and checking for electromagnetic interference. My scientific training kicked in, overriding the emotional turmoil. If something was hidden in that barrel, maybe it was electronic. Maybe it would emit a signal. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," I murmured, powering up the analyzer. The device hummed to life, its LCD screen displaying frequency ranges and signal strength indicators. I'd used this equipment hundreds of times for legitimate diagnostics, checking for interference from cell phones or radio transmissions that might affect delicate clockwork. But I'd never aimed it at a 140-year-old pocket watch with such dread in my stomach. The workshop held its breath around me. Even the wall clocks seemed to tick more quietly, as if they sensed the gravity of the moment. Afternoon shadows stretched across my workbench, creating an atmosphere of impending revelation. I positioned the analyzer's probe near the modified mainspring barrel, expecting nothing. Antique timepieces were mechanical marvels, powered by springs and regulated by escapements. They didn't emit radio signals. They didn't broadcast anything except the steady rhythm of time itself. "Here goes nothing," I whispered, my finger hovering over the scan button. The moment stretched like a held breath. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. The familiar scent of brass polish and machine oil filled my nostrils. Everything felt hyper-real, as if the universe was holding its breath for my discovery. I pressed the button. The analyzer's screen erupted with activity. A strong, consistent signal blazed across the display at 2.4 gigahertz, the frequency used by modern wireless devices. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, digital surveillance equipment. 2.4 gigahertz, I breathed, my voice cracking with disbelief. That's modern wireless transmission. The Victorian pocket watch, Eleanor Pemberton's priceless 1880s Waltham, was broadcasting like a tiny radio station. The signal strength indicated an active electronic device hidden within the antique mechanism, powered and transmitting in real time. My 40 years of experience crumbled as I stared at the impossible readings. This wasn't just tampering. This wasn't smuggling or fraud. This was surveillance technology, hidden inside a timepiece that would sit on Eleanor Pemberton's desk during her important business meetings. The workshop spun around me as the full implications hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. The signal analyzer's screen bathed my face in blue light as I stared at the impossible data streaming from Eleanor Pemberton's pocket watch. 3 months of transmission logs, every single one of her business meetings, captured and broadcast to... where exactly? I set down my jeweler's loupe and rubbed my eyes. 40 years in this business, and I'd never seen anything like it. The microtransmitter wasn't just sophisticated, it was surgical. Whoever installed this thing understood clockwork at a level that made my stomach turn. The workshop door chimed, and I quickly closed the analyzer's display. Susan Allen walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with that familiar staccato rhythm that meant business. "Scott, how's the Pemberton restoration coming along?" Her voice carried that clipped efficiency I'd grown to recognize over the past 4 years. She approached my workbench, those cold blue eyes scanning the disassembled timepiece. I kept my hands steady, continuing to work on the outer case. Making progress. Found some interesting modifications in the movement. Modifications? Susan's tone sharpened slightly. She removed her designer glasses, a gesture I'd learned meant she was focusing completely. What kind of modifications? The weight of the transmitter seemed to burn in the parts tray beside me, hidden under a cleaning cloth. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands maintained their steady rhythm. Someone's been inside this watch before. Recent work, too. Modern tool marks on components that should be pristine. Susan stepped closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the familiar scents of clock oil and metal polish. "Are you certain?" Mrs. Pemberton specifically mentioned this watch has been in her family for generations. "I'm certain." I picked up the mainspring barrel, feeling its wrong weight in my palm. The balance is off by 0.3 millimeters. That's not age or wear, that's modification. Well, family stories aren't always accurate. Perhaps a previous restoration wasn't properly documented. Susan's voice carried a dismissive edge that made my jaw clench. "Can you work around it?" I met her eyes directly. "Depends on what they were trying to accomplish. This isn't sloppy work, Susan. Whoever did this knows their craft." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition? Fear? It passed so quickly I almost missed it. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Scott, Mrs. Pemberton values her privacy. Let's keep any irregularities between us for now." The door chimed again as she left, and I was alone with the evidence burning a hole in my workbench. I pulled back the cloth, staring at the transmitter's sleek surface. The morning light seemed harsher now, casting sharp shadows across the violated mechanism. My hands shook slightly as I reconnected the signal analyzer. The data stream resumed immediately. Real-time audio capture, packet headers showing active transmission protocols. This thing had been listening to every word Susan and I just exchanged. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to Marcus Chen's number. My old friend ran an electronics forensics lab downtown, and if anyone could help me understand what I'd stumbled into, it was him. "Marcus, it's Scott Garcia. I need your expertise on something unusual." "Scott, Been too long, buddy. What's got you calling at 9 in the morning? I looked around the workshop, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. I can't discuss it over the phone. Can you meet me? Somewhere private? A pause. That serious? More serious than anything I've dealt with in 40 years of clockwork. My lab, 1 hour. And Scott, bring whatever you found. I disconnected and carefully packaged the transmitter in an anti-static bag, my movements deliberate and precise. The familiar weight of my tool roll felt different now, not just instruments of restoration, but potential evidence in something much larger than a simple repair job. The workshop's ticking clocks seemed louder now, their synchronized rhythm marking time toward a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. But every gear has its purpose, and I was starting to understand mine in this particular mechanism. As I locked the evidence in my tool case, one thought echoed through my mind. How many other timepieces in this workshop contained similar secrets? And how long had Susan Allen been using my craft to spy on our clients? The morning coffee had gone cold hours ago, but the bitter taste in my mouth had nothing to do with caffeine. The drive to Marcus's lab felt longer than usual, my mind racing through possibilities while my hands gripped the steering wheel. 23 years we'd known each other, met during my apprenticeship when he was debugging the timing circuits on a factory assembly line. Now he ran Chen Electronics Forensics, helping law enforcement trace digital evidence through the maze of modern technology. His lab occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse, filled with oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. Marcus looked up from a bank of monitors as I entered, his expression shifting from casual greeting to concern when he saw my face. "You look like hell, Scott. What's eating you?" I set my tool case on his workbench, the familiar weight feeling heavier now. "I need you to trace a signal. Tell me where it's going and who's receiving it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of signal?" I opened the case, revealing the transmitter still nestled in its anti-static bag. 2.4 gigahertz wireless transmission, broadcasting from inside an antique pocket watch. His expression darkened as he examined the device through the plastic. "Jesus, Scott, this is professional-grade surveillance equipment. Where did you find this?" "Client's watch. Routine restoration job that turned into something else entirely." I connected my portable analyzer to his lab equipment, the familiar green traces dancing across his larger monitors. "Can you follow the data stream?" Marcus's fingers flew across his keyboard, routing the signal through his spectrum analysis software. "Give me a few minutes. This is sophisticated stuff. Whoever built this knows what they're doing." I watched him work, noting the concentration that reminded me of my own focus when examining a delicate mechanism. The lab hummed with electronic energy, a modern counterpoint to the mechanical rhythms of my workshop. "Got something," Marcus said, pointing to a cascade of data scrolling down his screen. "Your signal's hopping through multiple relay points. Standard technique for masking the final destination. Can you trace it back?" "Already am." His fingers danced across the keyboard. "Following the packet headers, routing through 3 different servers, and..." He paused, frowning at the display. "That's interesting. What?" "The final destination. It's local, very local." He turned the monitor toward me. "The signal terminates at an IP address registered to Heritage Timepieces LLC. Specifically, it's routing to a computer in the main office." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the screen, watching the data packets flow in real time from the transmitter to Susan Allen's office computer. The betrayal felt visceral, as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. "She's been using me," I said aloud, my voice echoing strangely in the lab. 40 years of building my reputation, and she's turned my craft into a weapon." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the data flow. "How long has this been going on?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling through Eleanor Pemberton's appointment history. The timestamps on Marcus's screen aligned perfectly with her private business meetings. Every confidential conversation captured and transmitted in real time. 3 months, I calculated, my voice hollow. At least 3 months of corporate espionage. God knows how many clients have been compromised. The lab felt suddenly cold despite the warmth from all the electronic equipment. I thought about Eleanor's trust, the way she'd handed over her great-grandfather's watch with complete confidence in my integrity. How many other clients had suffered similar violations? Scott, there's something else. Marcus's tone carried a weight that made me look up from the data. You called at the right time. I've been meaning to reach out to you about heritage timepieces. What do you mean? He pulled up another window on his screen. Last month, I did some forensic work for a law firm. Corporate espionage case involving insider trading. The evidence trail kept pointing back to surveillance equipment hidden in antique timepieces. Ring any bells? My stomach dropped. How many cases? 3 so far, all involving high-net-worth individuals who had their antiques serviced by heritage timepieces in the past 6 months. Marcus's expression was grim. Scott, you're not dealing with a single modified watch. This is a systematic operation. I sank into a nearby chair, the weight of complicity settling on my shoulders. Every timepiece I'd restored, every client I'd served with pride, how many had been turned into surveillance devices without my knowledge? I need to document everything, I said, pulling out my laptop. Build a case that will stand up in court. For the next 2 hours, we methodically traced the signal pathways, documented the transmission protocols, and cross-referenced the data with client appointment schedules. Marcus's equipment captured everything: packet headers, frequency signatures, routing tables. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. This should be enough, Marcus said, burning the final data disk. You've got forensic proof of unauthorized surveillance, corporate espionage, and violation of client privacy. The FBI is going to be very interested in this. I was backing up the files to a secondary drive when my laptop screen flickered. The cursor froze mid-movement, then the display went black. No, 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 I muttered, frantically pressing keys. The machine was completely unresponsive. Marcus, something's wrong. He leaned over, examining my laptop. Looks like a hard drive failure, or... He paused, his expression darkening. Scott, is your laptop connected to Heritage Timepieces network? The realization hit me like ice water. Company-issued machine. I use it for client documentation and inventory management. They might have remote access. If Susan Allen suspected you were investigating, she could have triggered a system wipe. Marcus quickly disconnected my laptop from his network. Good thing we backed everything up to my isolated systems. But as I stared at my dead laptop screen, a chill ran down my spine. If they could reach through the network to destroy my evidence, what else were they monitoring? Had they been watching my investigation from the beginning? Marcus, I need to get back to the workshop. Confront her with what we've found. Be careful, Scott. If this operation is as extensive as it looks, there's a lot of money at stake. People have done worse things for less. I gathered the evidence disks, my hands steadier now despite the gravity of the situation. The familiar weight of my tool roll felt different. Not just instruments of restoration, but weapons in a fight for the integrity of my craft. The drive back to Heritage Timepieces felt like approaching a battlefield. The morning's comfortable routine had been shattered, replaced by the harsh reality that my employer had been using my skills to violate the trust of every client who walked through our doors. As I parked outside the workshop, I could see Susan Allen through the front window, talking on her phone with animated gestures. The sight of her filled me with a cold anger I'd never experienced before. She'd taken something pure, the ancient art of horology, and corrupted it for profit. The data disks in my tool case contained enough evidence to destroy her operation and expose the systematic violation of our client's privacy. But as I walked toward the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. The familiar chime of the door seemed ominous now, announcing my arrival to someone who might already know exactly what I'd discovered. The workshop that had been my sanctuary for 4 years suddenly felt hostile, contaminated by betrayal and corporate espionage. Time to find out how deep this conspiracy really went. I pushed through the workshop door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The familiar scent of brass polish and machine oil felt different now, contaminated. Every tick from the dozen clocks on the walls seemed to mock me. Time reveals everything if you know how to read the signs. Well, I'd read them all right. Susan's office light was on, of course it was. I climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, each step creaking under my weight. The building had character, Susan always said. Historic charm. Now I wondered what other secrets these old walls were hiding. Her door was open. She sat behind her mahogany desk, fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard with that rapid-fire precision I'd always admired. Not anymore. Scott. She didn't look up. Working late again? We need to talk. Of course we do. She closed the laptop with a soft click and finally met my eyes. Her expression didn't change. Not even a million. Her expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. That told me everything. I'm not sure what you mean. Eleanor Pemberton's pocket watch. The 2.4 gigahertz signal. The modified mainspring barrel. I pulled out my phone, showed her the spectrum analyzer readings. David Whitmore's background at Raytheon. The purchasing records for microprocessors. Susan leaned back in her chair, studying me like I was a broken mechanism she needed to repair. You've been busy. 5 months, Susan. 5 months of systematic espionage. Patricia Voss lost her merger because you bugged her Cartier clock. Eleanor's art acquisition strategy was compromised because you turned her family heirloom into a surveillance device. Sit down, Scott. I'll stand. She stood instead, moving to the window that overlooked Antique Row. The street lamps cast long shadows across her face. Do you know what this business was worth when I bought it? $43,000. Annual revenue. Not profit, revenue. That doesn't justify. I've built this into a $250,000 operation in 4 years. She turned back to me. By being smarter than the competition. By leveraging every advantage. By committing federal crimes. By adapting. Her voice sharpened. While craftsmen like you cling to your 19th century methods, the world moves forward. Our clients live in the digital age, Scott. They expect us to as well. I felt the weight of Marx's backup drives in my jacket pocket. The FBI won't see it that way. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in that corporate facade. You haven't contacted anyone yet. It wasn't a question. She knew. Somehow, she knew. Your laptop, she continued, moving back to her desk. The one that was remotely wiped yesterday. We've been monitoring your digital footprint for weeks, Scott. Every search, every file access, every email. My mouth went dry. You've been watching me. I've been protecting my investment. She opened a desk drawer, pulled out a manila folder. Your employment contract, Section 12, Subsection 4. Any disclosure of proprietary methods or client information constitutes immediate termination and potential legal action. Proprietary methods? You mean corporate espionage? I mean innovative restoration techniques that give us a competitive edge. She slid the folder across the desk. Your resignation letter is already prepared. Sign it and we can part ways amicably. Your pension remains intact, your references stay positive. I didn't touch the folder. And if I don't? Then we discuss how a disgruntled employee with mounting personal debts might fabricate evidence to damage his employer's reputation. She sat down, fingers steepled. Your daughter's college applications. Maria, isn't it? 16 years old, dreams of studying art like her mother. Expensive dreams. Ice flooded my veins. Don't. Carmen's teaching salary, your modest wages here, the numbers don't quite add up for private university tuition, do they? Financial pressure can make people do desperate things. The workshop below us chimed 9:30. 30 clocks marking time in perfect mechanical harmony. But up here, everything was broken. You're threatening my family. I'm offering you a choice. Susan opened her laptop again. Sign the resignation. Take your severance. Find another position where your traditional skills might be appreciated. Or force me to protect my business through less pleasant means. I thought about Eleanor Pemberton, trusting us with her grandfather's watch. About Patricia Voss, losing millions because her private conversations were recorded. About every client who'd brought us their treasured timepieces, never knowing they were being weaponized. David Whitmore, I said. Where is he? David tendered his resignation this afternoon. Personal reasons. He's already relocated out of state. Of course he had. The perfect fall guy. Vanished before the evidence could point back to him. Except I had proof of Susan's direct involvement. The purchasing orders, the receiving computer, the systematic targeting of high-value clients. You can't cover this up forever. I don't need forever, Scott. I just need you to disappear quietly. She gestured to the resignation letter. Last chance. I picked up the folder, felt the weight of 4 years and 3 months of employment, of reputation built over 4 decades. of the pension Carmen and I had counted on for Maria's education. Then I set it back down. No. Susan's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. I turned toward the door. Every gear has its purpose, Susan. Remove one, and the whole mechanism fails. Scott, I paused at the threshold. You have until tomorrow morning to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee your family's financial security won't become complicated. I left without another word, my footsteps echoing down the stairs. Behind me, I heard her laptop open again. More keystrokes, more digital manipulation. But she'd made one critical error in her calculations. She thought I was just another gear in her machine, easily replaced or removed. She was wrong. The workshop felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. I'd been here since 4 a.m., copying files to Marcus's encrypted drive while the building slept around me. Each transferred document represented another federal crime, another violated client, another shattered trust. The purchasing orders alone told the story. 23 microtransmitters ordered over 5 months. 23 timepieces restored by David Whitmore. 23 wealthy clients whose private conversations had been harvested and sold. My fingers trembled as I navigated through Susan's hidden directories. Patricia Voss. Her Cartier desk clock had recorded merger negotiations. The competitors knew her bottom line before she even entered the boardroom. $450,000 lost because she trusted us with her grandfather's timepiece. Eleanor Pemberton's file made my stomach turn. Art acquisition strategies, private collector meetings, confidential appraisals. Her $2.8 million purchase had been sabotaged from the inside. Every tick of that pocket watch had been a betrayal. I found Susan's investment portfolio buried in encrypted folders. The gains were surgical, perfectly timed purchases and sales that coincided with our client's compromised information. $340,000 in profits over 5 months. She'd been selling secrets like clockwork. A car door slammed outside. I killed the computer screen and moved to the window. Susan's black Mercedes sat in the empty parking lot, engine running, headlights cutting through the darkness. She wasn't alone. A figure in the passenger seat, tall, broad shoulders. David Whitmore hadn't disappeared after all. They were watching, waiting. I clutched the encrypted drive, my only weapon against a woman who owned this battlefield. The comfortable workshop had become a cage, and the predators circled outside. My phone buzzed, text message from an unknown number. Come outside, Scott, let's finish this conversation. I typed back, nothing left to discuss. The response came immediately. Your family disagrees. Ice flooded my veins. I called Carmen's cell, straight to voicemail. The house phone, no answer. Maria's cell, nothing. Another text. They're fine, for now. 5 minutes, front entrance. 23 timepieces, 12 violated clients, and now my family was leverage in Susan's game. I pocketed the drive and walked downstairs, each step echoing in the empty building. The front door's electronic lock beeped as I approached. Susan still had remote access to everything. The night air hit me like a slap. Susan stepped out of the Mercedes, her platinum hair catching the streetlight. David Whitmore remained in the passenger seat, his face shadowed, but unmistakable. You've been busy tonight, she said, gesturing toward the workshop windows. Late night inventory? Where's my family? Safe. Sleeping peacefully in their beds, I imagine. Carmen grades papers until midnight, doesn't she? Such dedication. Maria stays up texting friends about college applications. The casual knowledge chilled me. She'd been watching them, too. What do you want? Susan smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. The same thing I wanted yesterday. Your resignation. Your silence. Your disappearance from this industry. And if I refuse, then your family discovers how expensive Maria's college dreams really are. Carmen's teaching position becomes unstable. Financial pressure can destroy a marriage, Scott. I've seen it happen. I thought about the evidence on the drive. Federal crimes, corporate espionage, enough to send her to prison for decades. You're threatening innocent people. I'm protecting my business. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. She stepped closer. You think you're the hero in this story, don't you? The noble craftsman exposing corruption? But heroes have families to protect. Heroes have mortgages and medical bills and retirement savings. The workshop windows reflected our confrontation. Two figures in a pool of artificial light surrounded by darkness. Inside, 23 timepieces sat silent, their secrets finally exposed. I found everything, I said quietly. The purchasing orders, the client files, your investment portfolio. The FBI will be very interested. Susan's smile never wavered. Will they? A disgruntled employee making wild accusations against his former boss? David's already relocated. The equipment's been removed. And your access to our systems was unauthorized. She was right. I'd broken into her computer, copied files without permission. Any evidence I'd gathered could be dismissed as fabricated or illegally obtained. You planned this. I plan everything, Scott. That's why I succeed where traditional craftsmen fail. She glanced at her watch, a modern smartwatch, not one of the antiques we restored. You have until morning to reconsider. Sign the resignation. Take the severance. Disappear quietly. And if I don't, then you discover how quickly a 40-year reputation can be destroyed. Accusations of theft, substance abuse, mental instability, corporate sabotage. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Your family discovers how expensive defending against false charges can be. David Whitmore finally stepped out of the car. He looked older than I remembered, his face drawn with exhaustion or guilt. Our eyes met across the parking lot, and I saw something there. Regret, maybe. Or fear. David, I called out, you know this is wrong. He started to respond, but Susan cut him off. David understands the importance of loyalty and discretion. The morning shift would arrive in 3 hours. James Mitchell from the Horological Society was expecting my call about the investigation. Marcus had copies of everything on isolated systems. But none of that mattered if Susan destroyed my family first. I pulled out the encrypted drive, held it up so she could see it. Everything's documented. Every crime, every violation, every stolen secret. Prove it, she said, in court, with lawyers you can't afford, against a respected businesswoman with an impeccable reputation. She was calling my bluff. And we both knew I couldn't protect my family from a legal war I couldn't win. But as I stood there, surrounded by the mechanical precision of heritage timepieces, I realized something she'd missed in her calculations. Every gear has its purpose. Remove one, and the whole mechanism fails. She'd built her operation on trust. Clients trusting us with their treasures, employees trusting her leadership, the industry trusting her reputation. But trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired. I pocketed the drive and looked her straight in the eyes. Time reveals everything, Susan, if you know how to read the signs. I turned away from Susan and David in the parking lot, my boots crunching on the gravel as I walked toward my truck. The morning air felt sharp against my face, cutting through the adrenaline that had carried me through our confrontation. Behind me, I could hear Susan's heels clicking rapidly as she followed. "Scott, wait!" she called out, her voice carrying a different tone now, less threatening, more calculating. "Let's be reasonable about this." I stopped at my truck door but didn't turn around. My hand rested on the cold metal handle, and I could feel the weight of Marcus's encrypted drive in my jacket pocket. 23 compromised timepieces. Months of surveillance. All the evidence we needed. Reasonable? I said, finally facing her. Like installing transmitters in my restorations was reasonable? David Whitmore stepped closer, his soft hands fidgeting with his phone. Look, Scott, you don't understand the bigger picture here. These clients, they're not innocent. Eleanor Pemberton's art deals, Patricia Voss's merger negotiations. There's real money involved. Real money. The words tasted bitter. Built on violating people's privacy. Susan's eyes narrowed. You think your moral high ground pays Carmen's salary? Covers Maria's college tuition? She pulled out her own phone, scrolling to something. I know your finances, Scott. That second mortgage you took out last year, the medical bills from Carmen's surgery. My chest tightened. She'd been watching everything, cataloging our vulnerabilities like spare parts in her workshop. Here's what's going to happen, Susan continued, her voice smooth as polished brass. You're going to delete whatever files you copied. You're going to sign a confidentiality agreement. Flagged for review. Turns out her father flagged for review. Turns out her father has a history of stealing proprietary technology. Susan's smile was razor thin. I have connections throughout the city, Scott. People who trust my word over a disgruntled employee's accusations. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I thought about my workbench, 40 years of precision tools that would never touch another heritage timepiece. About the clients who trusted me with their family heirlooms, never knowing their private moments were being broadcast. You underestimate me, I said quietly. David laughed, a nervous sound. Come on, Scott. You're a clockmaker. What are you going to do, wind us to death? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Susan's confidence flickered as I opened it, revealing printed screenshots of bank transfers, encrypted communication logs, and technical specifications for the modified transmitters. Marcus Chen isn't just an electronics specialist, I said, my voice steady as a metronome. He's also a certified forensic examiner for the Massachusetts State Police. Every transmission, every modified timepiece, every dollar you made from stolen information, it's all documented. Susan's face went pale. You can't prove anything. Those files are encrypted, legally privileged. Were encrypted. I pulled out a second set of papers. Federal warrant, signed yesterday morning. Turns out Judge Harrison collects vintage pocket watches. He was very interested in how you've been corrupting antique timepieces for corporate espionage. The color drained from David's face. Susan, you said this was legal. You said it was just market research. Shut up, David. Susan's voice cracked like breaking glass. I continued, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. 18 U.S.C. 1030, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Massachusetts Privacy Act Chapter 214. The FBI's Economic Espionage Unit is very interested in your operation. You're bluffing, Susan whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Eleanor Pemberton's art acquisition strategy, Patricia Voss's merger negotiations, Robert Caldwell's termination payment to keep him quiet. I listed each violation methodically. $340,000 in insider trading profits, traced through your investment accounts. Susan stepped backward, her designer heels unsteady on the gravel. You don't know what you're destroying. Heritage Timepieces employs 12 people. Employed, I corrected. Past tense. The federal seizure order goes into effect at noon today. David's phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering against the pavement. Susan, what did you get me into? I gave you an opportunity, she snapped at him, to be part of something bigger than polishing old gears. By turning me into a criminal. David's voice broke. I installed those transmitters. I modified those timepieces. My fingerprints are on everything. I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. Young craftsman, talented hands, seduced by Susan's vision of modernizing the industry. But sympathy didn't erase the damage done. The FBI will want to interview you, I told David. Cooperation might help your situation. Susan whirled on me, her corporate mask finally shattered. You sanctimonious bastard. You think you're protecting some noble tradition? Clockmaking is dying, Scott. Digital killed it decades ago. I was trying to save what's left by destroying it. I tucked the papers back into the envelope. Every timepiece you corrupted, every client you betrayed, you poisoned the trust that keeps this craft alive. Trust doesn't pay the bills, Susan snarled. Neither does prison. I opened my truck door. The arraignment is scheduled for next Tuesday. I'll be testifying. As I climbed into the cab, Susan made one last desperate play. Carmen doesn't know about your gambling debts, does she? The poker games at Murphy's? The money you borrowed from Tony Castellano? I paused, my hand on the ignition key. For a moment, the old fear crept back. The shame of those Tuesday night games, the spiral that nearly cost me everything 3 years ago. Then I remembered the weight of Marcus's drive in my pocket, the evidence that would bring justice for Eleanor, Patricia, and all the others. Carmen knows, I said quietly. She's known for 2 years. We paid off Castellano together, sold her mother's jewelry to cover it. That's what marriage means, Susan. Something you wouldn't understand. I started the engine, the diesel rumbling to life. Through the windshield, I watched Susan's empire collapse in real time. Her face crumbling as she realized every leverage point she thought she had was built on sand. David was already walking toward his car, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling a lawyer. Smart move. Susan stood alone in the parking lot, her designer suit wrinkled, her platinum hair escaping its perfect arrangement. As I drove away, I caught her reflection in my side mirror. A woman who'd mistaken cunning for wisdom, who'd traded craftsmanship for profit, and lost everything that mattered. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last traces of fog. Ahead of me lay an uncertain future, no job, legal proceedings, and the challenge of rebuilding a career at 63. But my hands were clean, my conscience clear, and the evidence drive in my pocket would ensure justice for every violated timepiece, every betrayed client. Time, as always, would reveal the truth. And truth, like a perfectly calibrated mainspring, had its own inexorable power. The drive home felt different. Carmen sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee as we passed the familiar landmarks of our neighborhood. The radio played softly, some old country song about starting over. Through the windshield, I watched the world continue its normal rhythm while mine had just shifted on its axis. "You're quiet," Carmen said as we pulled into our driveway. "Processing." I cut the engine, listening to the diesel tick as it cooled. 43 years in this business, and I just burned the biggest bridge I've ever crossed. She squeezed my knee. "You protected people, Scott. That's what matters." 3 days later, I sat in my home workshop, surrounded by the evidence that had toppled Susan's empire. The FBI raid on heritage timepieces had made the evening news. Federal agents carrying boxes of modified timepieces out the front door while reporters shouted questions. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since. The latest message was from a clockmaker in Vermont. "Heard what you did," his voice said through the speaker. "If you ever want to talk about opportunities up here..." I deleted it with the others. 17 calls from master craftsmen across New England, all offering support, work, partnerships. The horological community was small, and word traveled fast when one of their own took a stand. My antique regulator clock marked the quarter hour with its familiar chime. I'd built this workshop in our basement 12 years ago, never imagining it would become my sanctuary after losing everything upstairs. The workbench held my personal tools, the ones Susan couldn't touch, couldn't corrupt. The evidence drive sat in its protective case, already copied and delivered to the FBI. Marcus had done his work perfectly. Every transmission, every violation, every stolen conversation, all documented with forensic precision. A knock at the workshop door interrupted my thoughts. Carmen appeared with James Mitchell behind her, his Horological Society credentials hanging from his coat pocket. "James," I stood wiping my hands on a shop rag, "wasn't expecting you. The community needs to know what you've accomplished." He examined the documentation spread across my workbench. Signal analysis charts, photographs of modified gear trains, transmission logs. This could have destroyed trust in restoration services nationwide. I poured coffee from Carmen's ceramic pot, the domestic gesture grounding us both. Outside, autumn leaves drifted past the workshop windows, marking the season of my professional transformation. "Susan's operation affected 23 timepieces," I said, handing him a mug. 12 high-net-worth clients. The damage goes beyond money, which is why your investigation matters. James sipped his coffee, studying the evidence. "The Society is preparing a formal commendation. Your methods, your documentation. This is what craftsmanship looks like in the modern age. Doesn't change the fact that I'm unemployed at 63. Doesn't change the fact that you're a master." He set down his mug. "Heritage timepieces is finished. Susan's facing federal charges. But you've proven that traditional methods and modern integrity can coexist." That afternoon, Eleanor Pemberton called personally. Her voice carried the crisp authority of old money, but also genuine warmth. "Mr. Garcia, I wanted to thank you for exposing what was done to my timepiece." She paused. "My $2.8 million art acquisition was compromised because of that transmitter. But your investigation prevented further damage. My business relationships remain intact because you acted with integrity." I sat at my workbench, surrounded by the timepieces that had witnessed my discovery. The afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, illuminating both my tools and my vindication. "I'm sorry it happened at all, Mrs. Pemberton." "As am I. But I'm not sorry you were the one to find it." Her voice carried a smile. I'll be recommending your services to my colleagues. The restoration community needs craftsmen who can be trusted. 2 days later, Patricia Voss arrived at my workshop, carrying her compromised Cartier desk clock in a velvet-lined case. I lost $450,000 because of that transmitter, she explained, setting the timepiece on my workbench. But I trust you to fix what Susan broke. I examined the clock under my magnifying lamp, finding the hidden modifications David Whitmore had installed. The gear train showed the same telltale tool marks, the same impossible precision that had first alerted me to Eleanor's pocket watch. This will take time, I said, documenting the damage with my camera. The mechanism needs complete restoration. Take all the time you need. Patricia watched me work, her expression mixing anger and relief. I want it done right. No shortcuts, no modern conveniences, just honest craftsmanship. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders as I became the craftsman who rebuilds what espionage destroyed. Every gear, every spring, every delicate component would be restored to its original state, purged of surveillance, returned to its intended purpose. 6 weeks after my termination, I opened Garcia Master Clockmaking in the converted garage behind our house. The sign read, "Traditional methods, modern integrity." Carmen had designed it herself, the lettering elegant but understated. My first official client was Robert Caldwell, the former Heritage employee who'd witnessed David Whitmore's suspicious activities. He arrived with a 1920s long jeans pocket watch, his hands shaking as he set it on my workbench. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted. When I saw David installing those components, I knew something was wrong. But Susan offered me $15,000 to stay quiet. I adjusted my workbench lamp, the familiar tools arranged precisely around me. You're speaking up now. That's what matters. Will you take the case? I opened the pocket watch, examining the movement under magnification. Clean, original, untouched by surveillance or corruption. Just honest craftsmanship waiting to be restored. I'll take it. Through the window, I watched Carmen tend her garden, both of us cultivating something honest and enduring. The morning light caught the brass gears in my hands, each component reflecting decades of tradition and integrity. I'd lost my job, my steady income, the security of corporate employment, but I'd gained something more valuable: the recognition of my peers, the trust of violated clients, and the knowledge that traditional craftsmanship still mattered in a world increasingly willing to cut corners for profit. The antique regulator clock chimed the hour, its voice steady and true. Time, as always, had revealed everything.